to have a couple of young filmmakers, 27 years old, come in and find new life in the movie. Rocky's story has basically been told.
Hollywood has always been a place where big personalities collide. The bright lights, the enormous egos, the insane amounts of money, and the relentless competition for the top spot create a pressure cooker unlike anything else on Earth. Most actors learn to smile through the tension, shake hands at premieres, and keep their real feelings buried somewhere behind their publicists' carefully worded statements. But Sylvester Stallone has never been that kind of man. Stallone is old school in the truest sense. He says what he means what he says, and if you cross him, you'd better believe he's not going to pretend everything is fine at the next industry dinner. This is a man who grew up hard, who fought for every single opportunity he ever got, who was so broke at one point in his life that he had to sell his dog just to keep the lights on. When you come from that kind of place, you don't have much patience for people who waste your time, betray your trust, or try to take what you've built. Over the course of a career spanning more than 5 decades, Stallone has had his share of friendships, rivalries, and outright feuds. Some started on set. Some started at award ceremonies. Some started over something as ridiculous as a sandwich. But every single one of them says something deeper about who Sylvester Stallone really is beneath the action hero exterior. Today, we're pulling back the curtain and diving into the 5 actors that Stallone has made no secret of despising. Buckle up, because some of these stories are wilder than anything that ever made it onto the big screen. To understand why Sylvester Stallone and Richard Gere have spent the better part of 50 years wanting nothing to do with each other, you have to go back to 1974, when both men were completely unknown. Neither of them was famous. Neither of them had a franchise to their name. They were just 2 hungry young actors trying to catch a break in a low-budget film called The Lords of Flatbush, a scrappy little production set in 1950s Brooklyn. For Stallone, this movie was deeply personal. He had co-written the script himself, drawing from his own turbulent experiences growing up in Hell's Kitchen. Playing the character of Stanley Rosiello, a tough young man with a complicated inner life, wasn't just an acting job. It was Stallone pouring pieces of himself onto film. He had been grinding through the industry for years, taking whatever scraps came his way, and this was finally a project where he felt he had genuine ownership and creative investment. Richard Gere came at the whole thing from a completely different angle. Trained in theater, methodical in his approach, Gere was the kind of actor who dissected every line before delivering it. He was cast as Chico Tyrell, another central figure in the gang of young men the story revolved around. On paper, having 2 passionate, dedicated actors on the same project sounds like a recipe for something special. In reality, it was a recipe for disaster. The 2 men clashed almost immediately. Stallone operated on instinct and raw emotion. Gere preferred careful, deliberate analysis. In a more relaxed production environment, these 2 styles might have found a way to coexist. But The Lords of Flatbush was a tight, low-budget shoot with very little room for disagreement or delay. The atmosphere on set was already tense, and the friction between Stallone and Gere made everything worse. Then came the moment that ended it all. During a break in filming, the cast was packed into a car together running through their lines. Lunch had just been served, simple craft services fare, and Gere happened to be eating a sandwich heavily loaded with mustard. At some point, a glob of that mustard slipped and landed directly on Stallone's pants. What might have been a minor, laughable accident under normal circumstances instead became the spark that lit the powder keg. Without a word of warning, Stallone snapped. He struck Gere and physically shoved him out of the car. The set went completely silent. Nobody was sure whether this was somehow part of the scene or a genuine eruption of violence. It was very much the latter. The producers and director were forced to make a swift, uncomfortable decision, and they came down on Stallone's side. Gere was removed from the production. His scenes were reshot with another actor. The official explanation was the ever-convenient creative differences, but everyone present knew exactly what had happened. Gere went on to become one of the defining stars of his generation, with films like American Gigolo and An Officer and a Gentleman cementing his place in Hollywood history. Stallone, of course, became something far larger than anyone could have predicted. But that early clash never faded from either man's memory. Stallone has been openly dismissive of Gere in interviews over the years, and the feeling appears to be entirely mutual. 50 years later, a mustard stain remains the foundation of one of Hollywood's most quietly enduring grudges. There was a time when Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis were on the same team, not just metaphorically but literally. They were among the small, exclusive group of actors who had defined what action cinema looked like for an entire generation. Stallone had Rocky and Rambo. Willis had John McClane. Together, they represented an era of filmmaking built around larger-than-life heroes, massive explosions, and a certain blue-collar swagger that audiences around the world responded to. By the time Stallone conceived The Expendables, both men were at a stage in their careers where the big action roles weren't coming as naturally as they once had. Stallone's idea was both simple and brilliant. Gather the legends, put them all in one film, and give audiences a celebration of the genre they loved. It was a passion project in every sense of the word. He wasn't just producing and starring in a movie. He was building a monument to an era of cinema he genuinely loved. The first Expendables film was a massive success, pulling in over $270 million globally and reminding Hollywood that there was still an enormous appetite for old-school action. The second film performed even better. Willis was part of the ensemble from the beginning, playing a CIA operative named Church, and the collaboration seemed to be working. There was a sense of genuine camaraderie in those early films, a feeling that everyone involved understood and respected what Stallone was trying to build. Then came the negotiations for The Expendables 3, and everything unraveled with stunning speed. Willis's representation came back to Stallone's camp with a demand that stopped everyone in their tracks. $4 million for 4 days of work. That works out to $1 million per day, with no flexibility and no room for discussion. Take it or leave it. Now, enormous paychecks are hardly unusual in Hollywood. But what made Willis's demand sting so deeply wasn't just the number. It was what the number represented. The entire spirit of The Expendables had been built around a sense of brotherhood, around guys who were willing to set aside pure financial calculation in favor of being part of something meaningful together. Willis's demand shattered that illusion completely. It made clear, at least in Stallone's view, that Willis didn't actually care about the project at all. He saw it purely as a transaction. Stallone chose not to cave. Willis was out. Harrison Ford was brought in as a replacement, and by most accounts Ford showed up enthusiastic, professional, and genuinely invested in the film. But Stallone didn't let the matter rest quietly. He publicly called Willis greedy and lazy, which is an extraordinarily blunt thing to say about a former collaborator in an industry that typically prefers its conflicts conducted behind closed doors. The fallout was significant. Willis's reputation took a hit, and the easy charm that had always been central to his screen persona suddenly looked different when set against Stallone's very public accusations. The Expendables 3 still made money, but the soul of the franchise had been damaged. The brotherhood Stallone had worked so hard to build felt cracked, and it never quite recovered that original warmth. A working relationship that had seemed solid turned out to be built on a foundation that money could dissolve overnight. Of all the feuds on this list, the one between Sylvester Stallone and Eddie Murphy is probably the most genuinely heartbreaking. This wasn't a clash between strangers on a movie set. This wasn't a contract dispute between two businessmen who happened to act for a living. This was the destruction of something real. An authentic friendship between two men who had actually liked and respected each other. In the late 1980s, Stallone and Murphy were at the absolute pinnacle of Hollywood's food chain. Stallone had built an empire on Rocky and Rambo. Murphy had conquered comedy and crossed over into massive action comedy success with Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America. They moved in the same circles, showed up at the same events, and by all accounts genuinely enjoyed each other's company. This wasn't a surface-level Hollywood friendship maintained for strategic purposes. People who knew both men described it as the real thing. Two guys from difficult backgrounds who had made it to the top and felt a mutual understanding that went beyond professional admiration. Then Beverly Hills Cop 2 happened. Stallone's wife at the time, model and actress Brigitte Nielsen, had a role in the film. She was a striking, magnetic presence, and she and Murphy spent considerable time on set together. What followed was the kind of thing that Hollywood gossip machines were built to amplify. Rumors, whispers, tabloid insinuations, and the relentless churn of speculation that turns a hint of something into a headline and a headline into accepted truth. Whether anything inappropriate actually occurred between Murphy and Nielsen has never been definitively established. What is clear is that the rumors were loud, persistent, and impossible for Stallone to ignore. Every tabloid pickup, every whispered comment at an industry event, every sidelong glance at a party chipped away at him. Stallone, who has never been the type to suppress his feelings and process them quietly, eventually did what came naturally to him. He picked up the phone and called Murphy directly. It was not a gentle conversation. Stallone was angry, hurt, and confused in equal measure. He asked Murphy directly what was going on. Murphy denied that anything inappropriate had happened. But by the time that denial arrived, the trust had already been broken. In a friendship, and especially in a marriage, suspicion once planted has a way of growing regardless of what the facts turn out to be. Stallone couldn't shake the feeling, and the friendship couldn't survive it. What made everything worse was the way the press seized on the story. Hollywood loves nothing more than a falling out between two of its biggest stars, and the media turned this personal wound into a very public spectacle. The two men stopped calling each other. They stopped appearing at the same functions. When they did find themselves in the same room, they stayed as far apart as possible. The warmth between them had been replaced by something cold and permanent. Murphy later reflected on how quickly years of genuine friendship had collapsed under the weight of rumor and damaged trust. For Stallone, the loss was profound in a way that went beyond professional rivalry. This wasn't a competitor or a difficult coworker. This was someone he had genuinely cared about. And in a town where authentic human connection is genuinely rare, losing that kind of friendship leaves a mark that fame and success can't erase. By 1982, Sylvester Stallone had already proven he was no fluke. Rocky hadn't just been a hit.